The rope burns on Nora Hartwell's wrists had barely healed when her uncle dragged her to the livestock auction in Granger's Bend. She stood among the cattle, head down, 23 years old, and worth less than a lame horse. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dirt lot, and she tasted copper in her mouth from biting her tongue too hard. Her uncle's hand clamped her shoulder like a vice. "Lot 47, he announced to no one in particular, shoving her forward. "Strong back, can read some, won't complain." The lie hung in the August heat, thick as the flies that circled the pens. Nobody looked at her face. That was how it worked when families sold their burdens. Nora had learned that 3 weeks ago when her uncle's new wife decided the farm wasn't big enough for 2 women, especially one who'd been touched wrong by the neighbor's son and couldn't seem to smile anymore. The bruises on her ribs were still yellow-green, hidden beneath the threadbare cotton dress that used to be her mother's. A tall man in worn leather chaps moved through the crowd. He didn't walk like the others, no swagger, no tobacco-stained grin, just steady boots on packed earth and eyes that looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. 3 children trailed behind him like ducklings, none of them older than 10. The oldest, a girl with braids the color of wheat, clutched the hem of his shirt. "What's the opening?" The man's voice was quiet. It made people lean in. $15 and she's yours, Hayes, her uncle said, too eager. "Indentured for 2 years. Papers are legal." Samuel Hayes looked at Nora then, really looked, and she wanted to disappear into the dust. His face was weathered like fence wood, lined around the eyes, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. But it was his expression that made her throat tight, something almost apologetic, as if he understood exactly what kind of horror brought a woman to this. 20, Hayes said, "and I'll need those papers to say 5 years. Her uncle's eyes lit up like Christmas lanterns. 5 years, that's how long it'll take me to pay off what I'm offering." Hayes pulled a leather pouch from his belt. $20, take it or I walk. The transaction took less time than it took to shoe a horse. Papers signed with a stub of pencil, money exchanged, and Nora belonged to someone new. Her uncle didn't say goodbye, didn't look back, just pocketed the coins and headed for the saloon, probably already spending it in his mind. Samuel Hayes held out the papers to her. "You can read these if you want, check they're fair." She stared at his calloused hand, at the contract that made her his property for 5 years. "Doesn't matter what they say, I can't change them." "No," he agreed, "but you should know what you signed, or what he signed for you." The children watched her with huge eyes. The girl with braids stepped closer. "Pa, is she gonna be our ma now?" "Maggie, hush." Hayes folded the papers and tucked them in his shirt pocket. "This is Miss Hartwell. She'll be helping around the ranch. That's all you need to know." "Is she sick?" This from a smaller boy, maybe 6, with a gap between his front teeth. "She looks sad like Ma did before." "Thomas," I said, "hush." Hayes's voice went firm but not cruel. He turned to Nora. "You got belongings to fetch." She almost laughed. Everything she owned was on her body, the dress, the split-sole boots, the shame that felt stitched into her skin. "No." Right then, he gestured toward a wagon hitched near the edge of the lot. "Let's get home before dark." The ride to Hayes Ranch took 2 hours, and nobody spoke much. The children whispered among themselves in the wagon bed, stealing glances at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Nora sat on the bench beside Hayes, watching the landscape roll by, endless prairie grass, clusters of cottonwood trees, distant mesas turning purple in the late sun. It was beautiful in a lonely sort of way, like a hymn sung in an empty church. "You ain't asked what the work is," Hayes said eventually. "Don't matter, I'll do it." "It matters." He kept his eyes on the road. "I got 3 kids, 9 head of cattle, 20 chickens, and a vegetable garden that's mostly weeds. Wife died last spring, pneumonia. I've been trying to manage it all myself, but," he trailed off, jaw working. "Ranch is small, you'll have your own room in the barn loft. It's clean, private. I ain't," he paused, choosing words carefully. "I ain't the kind of man who'd use a contract like this for anything improper, you understand." She looked at his profile, at the way his throat moved when he swallowed, and felt something crack in her chest. Not hope, she'd given that up weeks ago, but maybe the absence of pure terror. "Why'd you buy me then?" "Because you looked like you needed buying," he said simply. and my kids need someone who knows how to darn socks without cussing a blue streak. The youngest child, a tiny girl with hair like corn silk, poked her head between them. Can you make biscuits? Ruth, sit back. Hayes didn't raise his voice. The girl obeyed. I can make biscuits, Nora said quietly, and cornbread. My mama taught me before she died. Thomas's gap-toothed grin appeared beside his little sister. Pa's biscuits taste like rocks. He tries real hard, but they're awful. That's because you're supposed to let them rise, genius, Maggie called from the back. Pa don't got patience for rising. Hayes's mouth twitched, almost a smile. There's your first job, Miss Hartwell. Teach me patience. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, spilling orange light across a modest homestead, single-story house with a covered porch, barn that leaned slightly west, chicken coop, and a well with a bucket hanging from a crossbeam. It wasn't much, but the windows were clean and smoke curled from the chimney like a welcoming hand. Hayes set the brake and hopped down, then offered Nora his hand. She took it, feeling the roughness of work-worn palms, and climbed down. Her legs shook. She'd been sitting too long, or maybe her body was finally catching up to everything that had happened. Maggie, show Miss Hartwell where the loft is, Hayes said. Thomas, Ruth, go gather eggs before it gets dark. But Pa. Now, son. The children scattered like startled birds. Maggie lingered, eyeing Nora with open suspicion. You gonna stay? I don't have a choice, Nora said, more honest than she'd meant to be. Everybody's got a choice. Maggie crossed her arms. She was small but fierce, with her father's stubborn jawline. Ma always said that, even when she was real sick, she chose to keep fighting, said every breath was a choice. Nora's throat went tight. Your ma sounds like she was strong. She was, Maggie's eyes shimmered. You ain't her. I know. They stared at each other for a long moment. Two females sizing up their positions in a complicated hierarchy. Then Maggie spun on her heel and marched toward the barn. Come on, loft stairs are in the back. The space was better than Nora expected. Wooden floor swept clean, a real bed with a quilt, a small table with a wash basin, and a window that overlooked the eastern pasture. Maggie pointed to the quilt. Ma made that. Pa said you could use it, but you gotta be careful. It's the last thing she finished. Nora touched the fabric gently, tracing the pattern of interlocking stars. The stitches were tiny and perfect, made by hands that had loved this work. I'll be careful. Good, Maggie headed for the stairs, then paused. Supper's at 6. Pa'll ring the bell, don't be late. She disappeared down the ladder, leaving Nora alone with a dead woman's quilt and a future she couldn't imagine. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry silent tears that soaked into her collar, not because she was sad, though she was, but because for the first time in months she felt almost safe. The bell rang at 6 exactly. The first week passed in a blur of work. Nora woke before dawn, dressed in one of the spare work dresses Hayes had awkwardly presented, wife's things if you need 'em, and started breakfast. The children tested her constantly, Ruth hiding the flour, Thomas forgetting to fetch water, Maggie watching every move with those sharp eyes, waiting for Nora to fail or prove herself cruel. Hayes mostly stayed out of the house. He worked the cattle from sunrise to sundown, came in dusty and exhausted, ate whatever she'd cooked without complaint, and disappeared to his room. Sometimes she heard him through the thin walls, talking softly to himself or to God or maybe to his dead wife. It made her heart hurt in ways she didn't want to examine. On the 8th day, Maggie brought a broken doll to the kitchen table. Can you fix her? Nora looked up from scrubbing potatoes. The doll's arm hung by a thread, its painted face faded. I can try. Ma always fixed her, Maggie said quietly, but Pa don't know how to sew the small stitches. I'll need thread and a needle. Maggie fetched them immediately, watching as Nora worked the needle through the fabric body, reinforcing the shoulder joint, making tiny stitches that would hold. Her mother had taught her this, long ago in another life. The memory was sharp and sweet and painful. You're good at that, Maggie said finally. My mama was better. My mama too, Maggie took the doll carefully, inspecting the repair. Thanks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Nora felt the shift like a door cracking open. Thomas came around slower. He was shy and prone to hiding behind his father's legs, but he loved stories. Nora started telling them at bedtime tales her mother had told her about clever rabbits and brave girls and magical rivers. Ruth would fall asleep halfway through, her thumb in her mouth, but Thomas listened to every word. One night he took Nora's hand when she finished. "Will you tell another tomorrow?" "If you want." "I want." He squeezed her fingers once, then ran to his room. Hayes noticed. Of course he noticed. He was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, hat in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't name. "They're warming to you," he said. "Maybe," she wiped her hands on her apron, "or maybe they're just tired of you burning supper." His mouth twitched, that almost smile again, could be both. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but weighted. Hayes shifted his boots. "You settling in all right? Loft warm enough?" "It's fine. Because if you need extra blankets." "Mr. Hayes, it's fine." She met his eyes. "You've been fair, more than fair." He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "Ain't about fairness, it's about what's decent." He lifted his gaze. "You ain't property here, Miss Hartwell. I know what them papers say, but far as I'm concerned, you're free to leave anytime. I won't stop you." Her breath caught. "I got nowhere to go." "You got here." He set his hat on the table. "And if you choose to stay, it's because you want to, not because some fool document says you have to. Understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." He picked up his hat. "Night then." "Night." The first real trouble came on a Saturday. Nora was in town with Maggie buying supplies when she saw her uncle outside the mercantile. He was drunk, swaying slightly, eyes red-rimmed and mean. He spotted her and his face twisted. "There's the little whore," he announced to no one in particular. "Sold you off good, didn't I? Got $20 for damaged goods." Maggie's hand tightened in Nora's. "Who's that?" "Nobody." Nora tried to steer them past, but her uncle blocked the boardwalk. "Hayes get his money's worth yet?" "Bet he did. Bet you opened your legs the first." The sentence died when Samuel Hayes materialized from the alley. He moved fast for a big man, one hand fisting her uncle's shirt, slamming him against the mercantile wall hard enough to rattle the windows. "You got one chance to apologize," Hayes said, voice deadly calm. "One." Her uncle spat. "For what?" "Telling the truth. Everybody knows what she." Hayes's fist connected with his jaw. The crack echoed down Main Street. Her uncle crumpled like wet paper. "Pa," Maggie's voice was shocked. Hayes shook out his hand, breathing hard. He looked at Nora, eyes fierce. "Get in the wagon." She obeyed, numb. Maggie climbed up beside her, silent. Hayes swung up last, snapped the reins, and drove them out of town without a word. The horses seemed to sense his mood, moving faster than usual. Halfway home, Nora found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "He's not worth the trouble." Hayes pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty road. Dust swirled around them. He turned to face her fully. "Listen to me. I don't care what happened to you before. I don't care what anyone says or thinks. You're under my protection now, and I won't tolerate anybody treating you like that. Not in my town, not anywhere." His intensity pinned her in place. She felt tears coming and hated it, hated her weakness, but they fell anyway. "Why do you care?" His expression softened. "Because I got eyes, Miss Hartwell. I see how you flinch when someone moves too fast. I see how you check the door locks twice every night. I see you," he paused, "and I see someone who deserves better than what she got." Maggie's small voice broke the moment. "Miss Hartwell, you okay?" Nora wiped her face quickly. "I'm fine, honey." "Pa's right though," Maggie said stubbornly. "That man was mean. Pa shoulda hit him twice." Despite everything, Nora laughed. It bubbled up unexpected, breaking the tension. Hayes's shoulders relaxed. He picked up the reins again. "Let's get home." Summer turned to autumn. The prairie grass went golden, and the mornings carried frost. Nora fell into rhythms, cooking, cleaning, mending, teaching Ruth her letters, listening to Thomas's endless questions about why stars twinkled and where rain came from. The work was hard but purposeful, and slowly something inside her began to heal. Hayes worked himself half to death preparing for winter, fixing fences, laying in hay, slaughtering a hog. Nora helped where she could, learning things her mother had never taught, how to split wood without hitting her thumb, how to tell when a chicken was broody, how to read the sky for weather. They talked more, small things at first, whether the garden needed watering, if Thomas was coming down with a cold, but gradually deeper. One evening, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, Hayes told her about his wife. Elizabeth, he said quietly, met her at a church social. She laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. He smiled at the memory. Hardest thing I ever did was watch her die. She fought so hard, but pneumonia don't care about fighting. I'm sorry. Me too. He was silent for a moment. She'd like you, I think. She always believed in second chances, said everyone deserved one, no matter what. Nora's chest felt tight. I don't know if I'm getting a second chance or just postponing the inevitable. What's inevitable? Being thrown away again. He looked at her then, really looked, and his eyes were sad. You know what I think? I think you're worth 10 of any man who ever hurt you, and someday you'll believe that too. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. The turning point came in October. A fever swept through the ranch, hitting Ruth hardest. The little girl burned hot, crying for her mama, thrashing in sheets soaked with sweat. The doctor was 2 towns away, and the weather had turned, rain coming down in sheets. Hayes was beside himself, packing like a caged animal. I should ride for the doc, he said for the 5th time. You'd never make it in this storm, Nora said, wringing out another cool cloth. And even if you did, he couldn't get back before morning. Then what do I do? The desperation in his voice cracked something in her. You trust me. She worked through the night using every remedy her mother had taught her, willow bark tea for the fever, cool compresses, forcing Ruth to drink water sip by tiny sip. Hayes stayed beside her, holding his daughter's hand, whispering prayers. Thomas and Maggie huddled together in the corner, eyes huge with fear. Around 3 in the morning, Ruth's fever broke. She opened her eyes, clear for the first time in hours. Pause. Hayes sobbed, actual tears running down his weathered face. He pulled Ruth into his arms, gentle as anything, and just held her. Nora backed away, giving them space, but Maggie grabbed her hand. You saved her, Maggie whispered. The fever broke on its own, Nora said, but Maggie shook her head fiercely. You saved her, I know you did. Hayes looked up, still cradling Ruth. His eyes found Nora's across the small room, and the gratitude there was so raw it hurt to witness. Thank you, he said, voice rough. Thank you. She couldn't speak, just nodded. After that night, everything changed. The children stopped testing her. They brought her wildflowers and asked her opinion on important matters like whether clouds were made of cotton or water. Thomas started calling her Miss Nora instead of Miss Hartwell. Ruth insisted on holding her hand whenever they went outside. And Hayes started looking at her differently, like she was something precious he was afraid to touch. They worked side by side more often, repairing the chicken coop, harvesting the last of the vegetables, preparing the barn for winter. Their hands would brush reaching for the same tool, and electricity would spark between them, undeniable and terrifying. One evening in late November, with the first snow falling soft outside, Nora was kneading bread dough when Hayes came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway, just watching her work. She felt his gaze like a physical touch. What? She asked, not looking up. Nothing, just. He crossed to the sink, washed his hands. You look like you belong here. Her hands stilled in the dough. I'm contracted to be here. That ain't what I meant. She finally looked at him. He was staring at her with an expression that made her heart race, hopeful and terrified and wanting. Then what did you mean? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I mean, I've been thinking about asking you something, but I don't want to overstep. don't want to make you feel obligated because of them papers. Ask me. Would you, he took a breath, would you consider staying, after the contract's up, as more than just hired help? The kitchen went silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Nora's pulse hammered in her ears. More than hired help. As my wife, the words came out rushed, almost panicked. I know it's soon, I know I got no right to ask, but these months you been here, it's like the house woke up again. The kids are happy, I'm happy, and I hope, maybe you're happy too. She stared at him, at this good man with tired eyes and gentle hands, this man who'd bought her freedom when she had none, who'd protected her, who'd never once demanded anything from her. I can't be Elizabeth, she said quietly. I ain't asking you to be, he stepped closer. I'm asking you to be Nora, just Nora, and let me try to make you happy, let me try to be worthy of you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You already are. His face transformed. Hope bloomed there, bright and beautiful. Is that a yes? I'm scared, she admitted. I'm so scared. Me too, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and cupped her face. His thumb wiped her tears. But I think we could be scared together, if you're willing. She leaned into his touch, feeling safe in a way she'd never expected to feel again. Yes, I'm willing. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, like she was something holy. It was nothing like the violent touch she'd known before. This was choosing, this was wanted, this was right. Behind them, from the doorway to the children's rooms, came a delighted squeal. Maggie S.H.H.H.H., Thomas's voice hissed. You'll ruin it. They're kissing, Maggie whisper shouted. Pa's kissing Miss Nora. Hayes and Nora broke apart, laughing. He rested his forehead against hers. So much for privacy. Come here, you little spies, Nora called, and the children tumbled into the kitchen, grinning like fools. Even Ruth toddled in, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Does this mean you're staying forever? Thomas asked. Nora looked at Hayes, at his hopeful expression, at the children gathered around them like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking together. Yeah, she said, voice steady, forever. They married on the first day of spring, with wildflowers woven through Nora's hair and the children as witnesses. The whole town came, even people who'd looked the other way when her uncle sold her. They brought casseroles and quilts and awkward congratulations, and Nora accepted them with grace she'd learned from surviving. But the moment that mattered, the moment she'd remember forever, came later that evening. She was sitting on the porch with Hayes, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and red, when Maggie climbed into her lap, uninvited. The girl wrapped her arms around Nora's neck and whispered something that made Nora's vision blur with tears. I'm glad Pa bought you, Maggie said. You're the best thing he ever spent money on. Nora hugged her tight, this fierce child who'd tested and challenged and finally accepted her. I'm glad too, baby, I'm so glad. Hayes reached over and took Nora's hand, threading their fingers together. Thomas and Ruth tumbled out onto the porch, arguing about whose turn it was to scatter chicken feed, and the evening filled with noise and life and love. It wasn't the life Nora had imagined, it was better. Harder in some ways, the nightmares still came, the flinching at sudden sounds would probably never fully stop, but real, earned, hers. She'd been sold like livestock at an auction, bought by a stranger, contracted as property. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found home. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the prairie sky like promises. Hayes squeezed her hand. The children settled around them, warm bodies pressed close. And Nora, broken, healing, beloved Nora, finally let herself believe. She was wanted, she was chosen, she was home.